The Night House is a new horror film coming to us from Searchlight Pictures. This movie stars Rebecca Hall in a role of a woman who recently has been widowed. Her husband committed suicide out on the lake without any explanation, completely out of the blue, and she is left to her grief. But as she continues to stay in the house that her husband built for her, for them, that they have lived together in for, how many years, all of a sudden she starts to experience some hauntings, some very specific hauntings that lead her down a rabbit hole of horror. I've been incredibly excited for this movie for a while now because the trailer just looks so unique and kind of freaky, and I was really excited to take a look at it. After I saw the trailer, knowing nothing about it beforehand, I was like, I wonder who's making this movie. Is this going to be in good hands? And I found out two things. One, that's directed by David Bruckner, who recently gave us The Ritual on Netflix, a movie I believe I covered on this channel for a brief amount of time, and I really did enjoy that movie. I was glad to see him do another horror film, something that could potentially be better than The Ritual as well, because this just looks so freaky and right up his alley. And also, this is the man who directed the succubus section in the VHS horror film. Do you remember that? That was freaky as fuck. So him being able to continue making horror movies is obviously a great treasure. And then the second thing I found out is that the writers of this movie wrote a movie called Super Dark Times, a movie that, I kind of watched on a whim once with my dad. We were just scrolling through, I think, Netflix, and we were like, hey, what's this? Let's just watch it. And it was really fantastic, really dark, and this definitely seemed like the kind of source material, a woman going through grief and trauma, going through some hauntings. That could be really right up their alley, and they could do something great with that, especially when you team them up with David Bruckner, which isn't like a brand new thing either for them, because these two wrote the movie Siren, which is like a spin-off of like the succubus creature from VHS, and it's executive produced by David Bruckner. So I feel like these guys have kind of had this in the works for a while now, which is exciting to finally see, being brought to the big screen. And seeing it on the big screen was definitely very worthy. I know some people might be like, well, I don't know, some horror movies might just be fine to see at home, especially with the loud jump scares. But the sound design of this movie is so good and so frightening at times. It really does kind of warrant at least seeing it once in a theater to really get a true jolt, every single time some of these scares happen. They approached using jump scares in a way that was actually kind of different and unique compared to a lot of other horror movies that just throw them in just to throw them in. And this movie, David Bruckner, the way he stylized it, it was actually really effective. Like, there was quite a few times where I was literally kind of like jolting, and I was like, fuck, that is so good, the sound catches you off guard, but also what you're seeing is actually frightening as well, it blends together so perfectly, this movie is so freaky. David Bruckner directs one hell of a movie. He and his cinematographer did some really impressive shots. There's one shot in the trailer, the kind of silhouette kind of forming in the shape of the house, and it kind of, the head turns. As soon as I saw that in the trailer, I was like, I'm sold. And there's still plenty of other moments like that in the movie, where they show like, hey, is that a little shape back there in like the form of the house? And the camera will move and it'll go away once you kind of zoom in. It's really impressive stuff. They do some really wonderful things with the horror in this, especially in some sequences where you might be expecting a jump just to kind of relieve you. You might be expecting, all right, this is where the big, scream is going to happen, or a loud noise. And there's just some scenes where it just holds on like Rebecca Hall, and all of a sudden the movie kind of goes quiet for a long period of time when you're expecting a jump the most. So you're constantly like, I don't know what's about to happen, and that was really effective. It really did. David Bruckner really did deliver one hell of a scary movie. I'm a big fan of horror movies. I think, out of any genre of movie, I watch horror movies the most in my life because I enjoy them so much. I think they can be really great. And, there's a lot of horror movies that I've seen that I've liked, but I wasn't necessarily, like, spooked by, like, oh, that's really impressive, but, I'm not completely scared, like, that's just gonna happen, it doesn't diminish the work at all. There's very few horror movies that when I watch them, I'm like legitimately kind of like unsettled and like I am panicked right now. And watching The Night House in theaters honestly did kind of give me that feeling of I am experiencing something fantastic and really frightening. And I'm totally unnerved. David Bruckner, take my money now for your next movie because I'm already there. You're doing such an excellent job here. And even the musical score accompanying a lot of these scenes, sometimes it's hard to differentiate, like, is that just a sound effect or is that part of the score? And, re-listening to it on Spotify, probably a bit of both. Sometimes it's in the score, sometimes these sound effects are in the score, sometimes it might just be a sound effect. But Ben Lovett's score here is really fantastic. He worked with David Bruckner on The Ritual, which was obviously, that had great music, and I was glad to see him continue a collaboration with this movie, because there's several times where you're kind of unnerved by the music, but at times it can get really beautiful. It's hard to describe, but the way that Ben Lovett orchestrates this all, it's really impressive stuff. But more than all of the technical aspects and the filmmaking parts of this movie working, this movie also has a really fantastic story with a really fantastic lead in Rebecca Hall. Rebecca Hall is one of our finest actresses working today, and she, delivers this performance so well. She is so wonderful in this movie. You really do kind of buy her grief and trauma. She carries it so excellently. She's kind of at that stage where she hasn't moved on yet. It's still kind of fresh, but it's getting to that point where people are like, oh, okay, it's time to move forward, time to make some, actions to kind of move away from this. But she's still kind of stuck, trying to find any trace left of her husband, trying to cling on to this memory of him. And although she's not about to be on like the verge of tears or about to have a breakdown, she's like in that very jaded, kind of like cynical mindset of like, everything is terrible and, nothing will get better. What makes it so good is that they explore that grief so well as the movie goes on. This really is more so like a deep character study on, people who do go through grief and trauma and loss and being unable to move on and, kind of being stuck in this moment. But how it's also incorporated into the plot of the movie, because it's not just, oh, she's got some, backstory, but something else completely unrelated is going on and it doesn't really tie in, it's like it's woven into the narrative. So as the movie goes on, you're continuing to explore her grief and how it evolves the situation more so as well. And, I don't want to give too much away because there's plenty of things that, if you thought the trailer gave a lot of away, it kind of does, just as far as like specific shots you might not want to see yet, but it also doesn't, because there's a lot of turns in the narrative that I was not really expecting going in, especially when like the biggest thing about this movie is revealed. I was like, oh shit, this is actually kind of excellent as far as like a psychological thriller. It's a character study at its core with Rebecca Hall in the lead. This is kind of the perfect way to go about telling this story, and it's the perfect way to explore this theme, to have something really frightening be happening as well. Because one of the scariest parts about this movie, and I hate to sound like a pretentious dickbag about it, because this movie is very scary with a lot of the stuff they do, but one of the things that you take away from it is how scary some of the real world kind of elements placed in the movie are. Like, as I said, like a character kind of stuck with this grief and trauma, being unable to let go, what that can do to somebody's mind. Someone whose mind isn't even completely all the way there or has been through some rough times prior to this as well. What that can do to a person, what that can lead a person to, go down, that is also really, really scary. I've seen some people actually complain about the ending of this movie, saying it was weak, it wasn't enough, but I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around that, because when the movie finished, I was like, this is actually one of the most perfect ways to end a movie like this. This is the perfect ending for this film, for everything that they've been doing. There is a way that you can watch this movie, and I think you can, and I need to rewatch it maybe to solidify this, but I think there is a way where you can pinpoint some things and be like, this is actually more metaphorical. There are aspects of that in this movie, I feel. Even in like the supportive cast, it's not a supportive cast that's like, oh, we're just kind of here to populate the movie, but we don't really have much of an impact. It's a supporting cast that kind of has, substantial parts as the movie goes on. They're well placed and the actors are doing a good job. Sarah Goldberg, being like Rebecca Hall's teacher friend that's trying to like help her get through this, and Rebecca Hall's not really listening. She did a good job in this movie. Vondi Curtis Hall, who like plays like a neighbor of hers, who's also trying to, friend of the family and trying to help her out, he was really good in this. There is a way where you can look at like characters like that and, without spoiling anything, kind of piece like, this is this personified in human being characters, So there is an interesting like kind of rewatch factor to it, where I'm like, I would like to rewatch it just to see if some of this stuff kind of lines up, because they're doing some really impressive stuff with the literal stuff that's going on and how it applies to the real trauma and grief that people can feel. I wonder if like you can apply that for like everything going on. I don't know if anything I just said made any sense, but I really, really love this movie. I can't really think of any issues with it because I was so engrossed with the plot. Honestly, it could have been longer and I probably would have been totally fine. I can't picture this movie being any shorter. I love the cast. Rebecca Hall is once again, fantastic. I need to emphasize that she is wonderful in this movie and has so many great moments to shine, because so much of this is like her leading scenes and she does it so well. But David Bruckner is also a star in a way, and his filmmaking is really top notch here. I definitely prefer this movie over The Ritual, and I already like The Ritual, but this movie just had that really great personal touch, fantastic uses of the filmmaking and the cinematography and editing. It's just so wonderful in every single aspect. I can't think of anything wrong with it. I'm going to give The Night House an A+. I absolutely love this movie. It's one of my favorites of the year so far. I know we only have a couple months left of 2021, which is a really odd thing to think about, that we're, you know, over halfway through the rest of the year, but this is definitely going to be there as far as like my top 10 favorite movies. By the end of the year, I think this will definitely be there. This movie just thrilled me to the core, and I can't think of any other experience quite like this, because it's so unique and so well done in every single way. It's a bummer that, I know, you know, pandemic and think people are still getting used to going back to the theaters, and, you know, Delta variant, people are trying to, you know, prioritize stuff. I get it, but the fact that this movie only made like, what, $2 million at the box office, didn't even crack top 5, is honestly kind of a shame. I think this is the kind of movie that horror fans should definitely watch, but other people who just want to see a good movie should see as well, because there's just so much about this to like. But if you've seen The Night House, leave in the comments below what you thought of it, and as always, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe. I'm Jackson Fulcher. See you guys next time.